So welcome to the inaugural It's Not About Me podcast with my friend. Introduce yourself.
I'm Trip Braden.
Oh.
And I'm his friend.
My name is Greg Gloria, aka Social Greg on Twitter. So anyway, what we're going to do on this podcast is that we're going to talk about a lot of Tripp's articles, and he's written a lot of articles on his market leadership website. And so we're in the middle of this COVID-19 virus right now, and we're all locked down. So this is a great time to launch podcasts. So we're going to launch this one, and we're going to talk about one of his articles, which is the article I'm going to focus on today with Tripp is going to be, can emotional intelligence help leaders deal with COVID-19? So tell me about emotional intelligence and leaders.
Sure. I think what's interesting is everybody looks at everything that's going on right now as a technology problem, and they keep thinking about medical. They think, okay, how do we get all these things done? And somewhere along the line, they forgot they had people that they were working with. They forgot there were people involved, and they really need to focus on that piece. We can't really control a lot of the things that are outside our control, including how fast we can get a virus cure. But if we really work on it with the idea of, look, these are our people, we want to help them get through this and make them comfortable. So that's the leader's job, is to really help them alleviate their own fears.
And how does emotional intelligence play into this in your mind?
Well, the core concept of emotional intelligence is it's kind of your own operating system. You kind of manage what's going on in your life. So ultimately, what this does for you is you have an ability to first start with you. That's what's so powerful about emotional intelligence. You can't always control what other people are going to do and what their emotions will be. But by being yourself very stable, you're able to produce and provide different value as a leader. And it really is kind of critical right now when you look at the people who are standing out as leaders right now, who are getting a lot of accolades, are the people who are really producing better feelings for their followers and people and their stakeholders. So I think that's what we want to do with emotional intelligence, is use it as a tool for ourselves, first self-moderate, and then from there, extend that out to our people around us.
Yeah, in the article, you talk about developing stronger connections and relationships. So, what does that mean in this time for a leader?
Well, it's funny. Everybody keeps talking about all these different technology platforms. For example, we're on Zoom right now, right? So everyone's talking, oh, you got to learn how to use Zoom and you have to do this. Really, it's just common sense. I mean, I don't mean to be hard about it, but sometimes you got to say to yourself, look, common sense says if you have somebody who's upset, the first thing you do is talk about what they're feeling and listen to what they have to say. And if you do that effectively, you've moved them from being unempowered to being neutral. I'm not asking for them to go and say, let's go be, assertive, or let's go out and do some things we're not comfortable in, but let's make sure that you're comfortable with what you're doing in your role, because these are new roles for a lot of people. A lot of people don't work out of their homes every day. A lot of the structure that's in place right now that we have, even just the community structures where you can sit down and have a donut with somebody in the coffee room before you go to work for the day, that's not happening right now.
Yeah, a lot of people are scared out there, aren't they?
I've never seen so much fear. Even when I was in Washington after 9/11, the fear is different because it's personal. Mm. I think people, when it's health care related or health related, I used to work in hospice. And one of the first things you used to get over is, first of all, you have to get people to neutral. And the second piece of that is understanding people feel different, and you don't always know how they're going to react. People who are very rational, accountants, lawyers, all my professional friends, are very irrational right now because this is personal. It's like it's coming after them. And this is maybe the first time in their life they face that kind of imminent threat. Mm. So what we have to do as leaders is provide the foundation and a solid emotional foundation so people can feel safe. So that means we have to listen to what they have to say and not take it personally.
Pretty high stress for everybody, like you said, huh?
Well, it's a huge stress time, and people stress differently. One of the things I've learned with emotional intelligence, because I've used it in all kinds of settings, is people deal with stress, and it's not always the same thing. Something that's very, very, very major to one person is nothing to another. And some of the minor things for somebody else, the person's very thrown out of balance. You don't know what it's going to be, and that's why you have to really moderate your own behavior And that's why I think emotional intelligence is such a powerful tool. This is why I try to teach it earlier, not later in life. I've got this going out to people that have little kids and talking about what we're going through right now, because fear is so prevalent in our society today. And a lot of stakeholders outside this are taking advantage of that. They're driving fear into the people and the kids. And I think that's where we as parents and we as people who care about our children and our community people, is we have to be the person that's going to say, this is enough of this. We're not going to put up with this.
Give me an example of how they're driving fear, because I think that's an
Well,
important thing for people to understand how, this EQ and leadership thing.
sure. 6 times yesterday, they told you how many people died in the state of Ohio.
Yeah.
6 different major news releases saying this number hasn't changed in the last 6, but we're going to tell you about it. And it's going to show up on each medium in a different way. And they're going to pull out different facts from that media to tell you what's going on. Now, I'm not blaming the media, because the media makes a living by being sensationalized. So our job is to neuter that. Our job is to turn the media off if we have to. Our job is to say to our children, let's go out and play. Let's do something else in the area. Let's find another thing to do than sit down and watch TV 24 hours a day.
You could be alarmist, or you could actually, deal with the situation and, let the experts take care of it, and you do what you need to do to keep everything running, right?
Well, I think part of the other part of this about emotional intelligence is a framework, but it's also a process. And if you use the process and work with the process, you go and you understand at the beginning of this process, there is fear. It's natural. So let's work our way from fear into a learning zone. Let's figure out how we process this information in a way so that we move from learning to even to growth. Because most states, we have another 30 days at least lockdown. So we're going to be doing this for at least 4 more weeks. So we need to start to empower people with our actions and how we help them better understand what they need to be doing, and also what they need from us. We are I was going to say, we are the adults in the room, but the reality is sometimes they are the adults in the room, and they are the best adults in the room because they are in the room and we are not. So you have to say to yourself, you have to believe people that have they have the best interest of everyone involved. That's another tenet of emotional intelligence. It's not enough to be emotionally intelligent yourself. You have to believe other people are as well. And I'm sure we all know people who have gone off the deep end at times. Absolutely. In a very difficult situation. And all we did is throw gasoline on the fire. Well, that's not what we want to do today.
I were talking yesterday just about this, some of this subject, and we were saying how certain people that you've interacted with online in the last few weeks kind of almost done a 180 flip in your mind, right? I mean, it is a stressful time, and so how do you manage that as a leader?
Well, I think first of all, you understand it's going to happen, right? It's not maybe if it's going to happen; it's going to happen at some point. And the second piece of this, we as someone who is trying to moderate the situation, we have to acknowledge this is real. I mean, one of the things I think that strikes me, and we talked about this yesterday, right? This idea that from where I'm coming from, I don't think of the world the same way other people do. And that's okay. And that's why many times I'm the leader. But the other hand is the follower is important today, if not more so than the leader. And that means you need different kinds of skills. And those things are adapting. Those things are talking to people. Those things are really getting a good read on what's going on in that person and being able to know what might be the best solution for them, because they're not making that decision right now. So if you help them make that decision, you're empowering them to make the decision the next time on their own. Let's say someone's having a bad day at work. They got pulled over on the way over because the police said they can't be out driving around today, and they're out getting groceries for their family. They see those lights in the back, in their window, in the back window, and they say, oh no. Because your natural response is not, oh my gosh, it's the police. I can't believe it. They're pulling me over. So part of it is understanding when someone has that kind of an incident happen and they don't have somewhere to outlet it, turn it to somebody they can talk to about this. Somebody who might be working with them, a coworker, a friend, somebody. A lot of the people we're talking about, especially the younger people who are not married, are working in their own homes. They're on their own for the first time in a way that's different. And they don't have the social system set up except, texting, right? Or tweeting. And sometimes when you use those kind of things, not meaning to do it, but you pick up on a conversation and you think, oh, I'll put a comment in here. And it sets the person off because they say, I was directing that to someone. You really don't know that, but it doesn't matter because we can only control our own actions. And
Wow.
that's kind of where I see a lot of times when we do this. The other part of this is I think when you start to move into uh, dealing with this, and I was thinking about this when I was writing this, and it's changed a lot. The self-awareness is something we should be working on every day, right? Let's use
Yeah.
that term. That's what they use intentionally. The self-management piece, though, is something we're not so used to doing. It's a muscle we develop over time. You have
Hmm.
to do it incrementally. You can't be hard on yourself when you make a decision that you're going to do something in a certain way and it didn't work out. Look, this is the time when you have to have self-confidence.
Interesting.
Self-management is a very big issue to me, is their self-confidence.
Describe self management to me. I mean, what does that look like to people? I mean, what elements does it has in terms of emotions that you need to have for self management?
One of them is optimism, right? I mean,
Mm.
it's a choice. Optimism is just as pessimism is a choice, and I think we tend to lean towards our own choices, and we tend to fall in a place where people are trying to figure out what's the best way to go. And in any given situation, we have choices every time. So self-management says you pick the better choice. Doesn't mean you always get the right choice, but you pick the best choice you can make at the time. And I think that's the other part you have to be understanding about for yourself. Compassion, right? I mean, this idea of having compassion starts with you. I know it's very popular to talk about being compassionate. I write a lot about compassion, right? But it also includes self-compassion and self ability to look at themselves in the mirror and say, look, I did the best I could. I made the best choices.
Right.
You know, think about
Yeah.
if the person gets
Yeah.
the virus. I mean, they
Yeah.
did everything they could and they still get the virus. Typically people think it's my fault.
Yeah. So you said there's a lot of guilt associated with it.
Oh, tremendous amounts of guilt in the whole idea of self-management. And guilt is a kind of a thing that's an accelerator. It takes whatever you are normally and accelerates you to the next place. So part of that acceleration has to be control. And acceleration also means you know what speed you're going. One of the things
Yeah.
is, and we talked yesterday about this a little bit, I've talked to several other people recently about it, the idea that you actually know what's going on in your
Mm.
environment and you feel like you're in control again. Self-management is about locus of control. What's the controlling interest of what you're doing? And are you making the decision based on control?
I think that there's there's the other part that you talk about as another element, which is also empathy, right? For you to, all these things work together, right? They're not siloed, right? I mean, so you talked a little bit about self-management and self-awareness, but then there's this piece called empathy towards others. I mean, I know that in a lot of people it's hard because they think about themselves ahead of others, right?
Well, I think many people are brought up that way. I mean,
Mm.
a lot of people have self-interest. That's how they're brought up in the world. It's not something it's not a choice. It's an operating. Again, thinking of emotional intelligence more of an emotional intelligence operating system is how do you make your decisions that are, Robert Cialdini talked about the click word. When something happens in your life, you immediately respond in a particular way. Many people today, and particularly in a time like this, immediately go to victim mode, right? So now you have a situation where the person feels unempowered, out of control, and not sure what's going to happen next. And you're going to ask them to make a critical decision. That's not a good place to be if you're making critical decisions. You've got to have some critical thinking skills involved. You have to have some distance and space that you can look and work around some things. You have to ask good questions and bring other people. I mean, part of it is when you're working by yourself like we are now, and we both work by ourselves much of the time, you have some self moderation there. That if you have a bad moment, no one else sees it. But if you're in an environment where you're making decisions or you're making a call on, like we are right now, to somebody, and the person irritates you, it's not unusual for you to act irritated. Where normally, if it was just on the phone, you wouldn't know they were irritated with you. But because they're seeing you for the first time, you're almost overwhelmed by their emotions that were always there to start with, but you never saw them because they were on the phone.
A lot of people don't realize that sometimes your emotions are mirrored in the other person. So if you're being fearful, the other person is going to feel that as well, right? As well as anger and other emotions, right?
Well, and the other part is a lot of people in certain kinds of jobs, in particular, they make a living because they model and they mirror the person they're talking to, Now, that's okay when you're in a good mood. When you're in a bad mood and you're trying to bring someone down, and think of a customer service rep who's getting a call where something's supposed to be delivered to somebody, and all of a sudden they're on the phone with someone, and the person is screaming at them. Well, if they scream at them back, which is the way they might want to respond, by mirroring that person,
Yeah.
no one wins.
Yeah.
So what you have to do is say, okay, how do we start to moderate that down? How do we have empathy for others? How do we understand maybe it's not important to you that something came that day, but this is for their child's 12th birthday, and they've been waiting for this for a year, and it's not going to be delivered because they're not making deliveries in the area. And they call you and say, what can you do for me? You, first of all, you have to acknowledge this is real for them, right? I mean, you have to have the ability to say, okay, I have empathy for you, and don't treat them with sympathy.
Right.
See, because it's natural for many times when we have bad situations. I think of when I worked in hospice again, you had situations where people were very angry, and it would be very easy to go in the same place they are, but you really can't do that because someone has to display a certain level of emotional guidance to say, okay, let's pull this together and figure out what we can do for you. What are your options? Let's take a look at this.
Yeah, I think a lot of health professionals tend to have that. I feel when I'm in the hospital, and not all. I mean, they're human like us, right? But I think a lot of the health professionals I've dealt with, had that kind of, they'd stopped and listened and understood, and said, "Wow, I'll do my best."
Well, maybe the other thing I'd say to you, and this is a discussion for another time, but I think it's a good point to bring up, which is the kind of person who's attracted to that job. The kind of person who's attracted to being a health professional has a more serving leader models anyway. That's
Right.
not the same person who might be running a big company, which is having to make decisions very quickly, and that they're permanent decisions when it comes to healthcare. So a lot of times, the person who's attracted to that has certain skills and capabilities, and they expect them from you. That's where you get the problem. Is if you're the caregiver, they're very detached at times. If you look at some of the people have taken care of you, they're very detached from what's really going on. You don't feel very heard, especially in a situation like COVID, where we really don't know what to expect. So our normal protocols, and they actually call them that in healthcare, right? I mean, you have these whole systems around how you react to people in given situations. Person has a gunshot wound, here's how you react. They see it enough times. Some of these things, these are brand new symptoms. These are brand new ways. They're looking, and the doctor's not only the doctor who's he's trying to diagnose what's going on. He's got to come up with a treatment regimen in real time with you that's going to keep you alive.
Right.
And we're asking for them to do that very, very quickly. And to be candid, some doctors are very good with that, and some doctors aren't.
Right.
But typically, because there's not an overflow, you get the best people doing the best job they can in the best roles they're in over time. Today, we've got people coming into health systems like in New York City, and they literally are dropped in almost on parachutes to go and work at a new hospital. And they don't know what they're doing. They don't know their way around. They've never been to a big city. And the people they're working with have been working 24/7 for several days. They don't know what to do. They don't realize what it's like for somebody who's never been in a big city.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, you've got a whole bunch of circumstances that just continues to roll out of control. And part of it also is understanding the people that are working with you are doing the best they can.
Right.
If you put that in your head and say, every time I talk to someone, no matter what happens, if they give me a ticket, I'm speeding today, I got a ticket, they give me a ticket, they're doing the best they can.
Right. Right.
And that's kind of the way you go at it, is a whole mindset. Emotional intelligence can be a mindset. It can be any number of things, but the other part is you have to institute it. We can't force it on you. You can't say, here, be more, calm down, be cool. Because that just makes you more angry.
Give me an example, like, you've done hospice, you've dealt with family issues over the last few years, and dealing with professionals, and some, it wasn't to your satisfaction. How would you, suggest to people kind of manage through some of that stuff that's very uncertain?
Well, I think, first of all, the first thing I always teach people to do is to understand that ultimately you have to, when you're a caregiver, you're going to have a different set of priorities than the person who's taking care of you. And part of that is having that ability to objectify that, look at it from the point of view, what can I do? So we've kind of put a set of criteria around how we interact with people. And before we say something, You know, and when I worked in hospice, it was a 10-second rule. And the first thing I did with the patients was I said, it's a 10-second rule. You can do almost anything the first couple times because I know this is very stressful for you and your loved one. You can yell at me, you can call me names, you can say I'm used, whatever you want, 10 seconds. And they said, well, you know, we never do that. I said, well, you probably will because most people do. This is not what you're used to. This is the end. And then you say, but let's talk to the patient. Let's figure out what we can do for the patient. What do you want for that patient? What's the ultimate outcome you want from this? Even when it's personal. You know, I'd like to see my dad get more time with you. I'd like to have him spend some time with the minister when he comes to can you take care of that? Can you make sure the minister understands he doesn't believe in God? You know, sounds like a pretty simple thing, but this is the end of life. This is not a dress rehearsal. So part of this is you set some strategic ground rules in place, you know, and you do it in a way that allows for that patient to help set them. Because you understand that, you know, you ask them good questions. One of the most powerful tools we can use for emotional intelligence anywhere is ask good questions. No matter what you're doing, ask questions. Even when you're really not feeling like that, you want to tell somebody, you have an opinion, you want to share it. If you can just step back enough to ask a question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that always increased my ability to maybe increase the empathy knob a little bit because, like, I'm listening more when I'm asking the question. You know, I'm asking them to tell me what they're feeling, that type of thing, right?
Sure, and I think that one thing is, I think we underestimate how little we get taken care of. It's not you don't have to go a long way to make a big difference in life. You can make a big difference by just doing the little things. It might be opening the door, a smile, a newspaper. You know, I mean, these are the little things, especially when you're in a hypercritical situation or a hyper stress situation. How do you get to that point where you just feel very comfortable doing little things for people? You know, get them comfortable. I know for myself, when I worked in a hospice environment, people have different touches. You know, they don't like to be touched. Some do like to be touched. And you have to figure that out, and you have to figure out what it means. Because that's the other part of this is a lot of times you can calm a person down with a single touch. I remember a couple people I worked with in the military where they literally could come up behind you, and they were big guys, and so were the people they were touching. And they would just slightly touch them on the shoulder, and you could see the temperature drop 20 degrees with that person. That person went from hyper to calm. And it was all by a single touch. So part of it is learning to use your senses a little bit more effectively on what you're doing to better understand how people respond to certain things and how you're going to respond to them and what they like. Because this is really, when we're talking about COVID in particular, the stressors are all there and they're not going away, at least for the short term.
Yeah, sure.
But over the longer term, we're going to have to survive this. And that means you have to say, we've got to figure out new ways of coping with these kinds of issues because they are changed. And I think that it's kind of like the idea of a balloon that doesn't ever stretch back the way it was.
Yeah.
Nor does a mind once it's gone through the process like that.
The magnitude of a lot of these things that we're going through are like you said, new. These are all new for leaders. 2, there's a lot of uncertainty around this. And then 3, there's a lot of conflict around them that they have to manage, right? So,
well, they're getting a lot of conflicting sources of information. If they have 3 children, they probably have 3 stories of what they should be doing to take care of mom and dad. And then the doctor's going to throw a 4th one in there if they happen to get sick.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is now we have this whole smorgasbord of things going on that says, look, here are some things you need to be thinking about, and we need to be more aware of what other people think, you know, in multiple ways, and how people approach problems and challenges. You know, some people just walk away, and just the best thing to do is let them walk away. And some people want to talk about it. Some people want to literally go within a foot of your, you know, I always think about when you go work in a hospice or when you work in a, you know, in a chemo with AIDS patients, you sit there and some people just want to be hugged, you know. And it's funny because people say, aren't you afraid? Fear not, right? I really believe that. I think part of what we need to be doing is, you know, it's Easter week coming up, and one of the things is the one thing that says in the Bible habitually is fear not. And I think if we all looked and said, look, let's bring the fear down a little bit, everything else starts to fall in line.
Yeah. I mean, the word leader is really wide, right? I mean, it isn't just the guy at the top. Sometimes it could be the guy at the bottom, right?
I think that's the other part of this. We're all leaders in different aspects of our life. And I think we're all followers. I think if you look at really great leaders, and I've been blessed to work for some of the most successful leaders on the planet, right? And part of what you find is they know how to follow. Look, I have no power in most relationships I work in for a day-to-day business for my job as an executive coach and advisor. But my CEOs make decisions based on what I share with them, right? And so
Right.
they learn very quickly and to be willing to be a follower for a little bit. They do silly things. When you talk about how do we break this hold that's on our society right now, I think we should just put comedians on 24/7 on YouTube, and we'll have different channels so we can have different kinds of humor. But think about it. I mean, think how much fun it is just to sit and laugh a little bit and watch a little bit about what we're doing, and understand that it's okay to laugh. I mean, I had somebody tell me yesterday, this seems like it's pretty serious stuff. I said, well, of course it is. It's life and death stuff.
Yeah.
But the people who do life and death stuff typically have a good sense of humor about it.
Yeah.
The doctors that you like working with are very amiable about what they do, and they're very comfortable being the goof occasionally. A goofy thing that they just look at you, and you have that little goof look on your face, and they both get it, and it just lights up the patient.
I appreciate that part of it from a health professional standpoint, when they could actually let their hair down for a little bit and kind of say say something stupid, like you said, goofy or whatever.
Well, I think the other part is they get their lead from you. I mean, if you're the caregiver, I mean, a lot of the things that concerns me now as we go into this heavier stage of the virus, where people are getting sick, and there's a number of people getting sick, is how worn out our caregivers become. How do we help them feel good? How do we make a difference? And I think that's kind of, for better or worse, that's what I think of President Bush, the son. And the story about when he went to go around at the military hospitals at times, and he'd have a little bit of humor, and he was a little goofy, to be honest. I mean, he hung around, you could tell him watching a little bit goofy about some things, but he always understood how to make the people he was talking to feel like they were the only person in the room. Same with Bill Clinton. I worked with both. Bill Clinton, the most amazing thing about Bill Clinton was when he was with somebody, there was no one else in the room. And we could take a page out of Bill Clinton's book on that, right? I mean, ultimately, he made people feel like they were heard. He could listen to people, and it didn't matter how many people and who else around you was there. When President Clinton was talking to you, you felt heard.
Yeah, and I think that's what attracts you to a lot of people, especially when you're listening to these press conferences across the board in any state, governors to mayors to other leaders, right? I mean, there's certain ones that because of our personal preferences, kind of like what you were saying earlier, we tend to gravitate to those types of leaders, right? So,
well, the leader validates what we already feel.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if we think this person is very good, I've seen many of the candidates this year for the Democratic Party. I've seen President Trump. They tend to gravitate, the people who are around them believe what they believe about them. Now you sit there and it confirms a lot of your beliefs. So how do we get around that?
Yes.
And how do we get people, I'm sitting here looking and they're saying, well, we're going to go in and we're going to do all these things. And you're thinking, saying, this guy's under a tremendous amount of stress. I can't imagine a president being under the stress this man is under. Yet we're hearing all kinds of negative stuff coming out. And so I said to one of my friends who said to me, look, what would you do? I said, well, first thing, I'd give him a little space because he's doing the best he can. Well, how do you know that? That's the way I see the world. I worked on both sides of the aisles. I understand their stress. I worked for, the two most reviled presidents before this one, President Clinton during his impeachment and President Bush during 9/11.
Yeah.
Right after 9/11. And you can't get more reviled by people than those people were. Yet longer term, you start to get to know them, like them. They're very likable people. But I think the other part of it is when you're working with the local government. The other part, like I've been working with Governor DeWine in Ohio. Been in several meetings with him over the last several months, and it's fascinating to see how he works with people. And I think it's a page we could all take out of the book. Is how do you work with it so people feel heard. One of the things that's bad about serving leadership, I think, is something that I try to write about and talk about a lot. Was, we think it's a weak spot. We think it's weakness that we're not pushing back on people. Oh, we're placid, uh, we're contemplative. We just wait till the person comes to us. We don't get in their faces. And I think part of that, when you look at this and you say, okay, it's really hard to do that, especially if you're, like in my case, I'm an outward person. But what I've learned is if I do that, I get a lot better. I can get a lot more done quickly. But the other part of that is you also have an opportunity to do some things. And I think that leads to one of the weird things to me about as we look at where do we go from here, right? Because I think the other thing I'd like to give people in the last couple of minutes is, look, we now are out of the fear stage, right? We should be moving out of fear. So where do we go from there? What's productive to go from there? And I think that what I've seen, the people who have been effective at this before in history, is they move to learning. And people are brief. And I think what we can do is, instead of that, be curious. I have one of my favorite mentors used to say, be curious when no one else is. Just ask a lot of questions and listen to what they have to say and let them do what they need to do. But go into a place where we don't have the answers. I mean, if anything comes out, I'm not sure when this comes out, but when we come out with this, you realize how far off we were in initial stages of what we thought was going on and what's actually happening now in some areas.
Right.
And the other thing is, throw those damn statistics away sometimes. These are people. Tell me about the people. Tell me a story. Tell me a story. Tell me about that person who survived. You heard about that woman who was 89 and her husband 90 who survived. Tell me about that. I want to feel good. Well, and that's where I think if we start moving to learning, we're starting to find out things and we can start to be contributors to the ideas and discussions, especially in our communities. Because this is not a 9/11 where you had certain cities that were hit hard. And this is where we went and we had to deal with it. This is everywhere, which means to me, you need a learning environment. You need a learning organization. You need a learning mindset if you're going to survive this. So that's the next step. So let's go there, learn. From there, you go to growth. The idea, okay, what have we learned? How can we grow? Now, growing to me might be having conversations with our children again. Look, I don't have children. When I was on a board at one point, I had 500,000 kids in my system, right?
Well, you have dogs.
I've got dogs. They're much more fun than children because they're only two.
They're both fun.
Right,
he didn't mean that.
So,
he didn't mean that, parents.
That's right. But children, the children, you have to be more active in parenting at this point. And you can't be fearful about doing the wrong thing. You can't break your kids most times by making a bad decision. But the only decision that's a bad decision is no decision. Right. So let's talk about how do you do that and how do you help your kids grow through this? Look, this is the most staggering situation that most of us will ever live through. You know, we thought World War II, we thought 9/11. I think for most people, this is even scarier because it's personal.
Absolutely.
It's every part. So now we have an opportunity to go into a growth mode. What do we learn from this? You know, Bill Gates is talking about the next pandemic. He's getting all kinds of trouble because he's saying, this is next. What's next? We've got this problem. What are we going to do about it?
Right.
You know, but it's about growth. And so that's where I think you go into that mode where you start to see what you've learned. What can you do? What do you bring in your community? You know, the idea of going out and getting groceries for people, the idea of going out and helping people, you know, going out and serving someone in a way that you couldn't do it before because you were being obtrusive. One of the funny things to me, people laugh because I get around a lot of older people at times at hospitals and stuff. And I sit there and I talk to them and I walk with them, you know, and I get them to walk. And they say, you know, no one else gets me up and walks me. Well, you know, this is growth. Let's talk about what you want to do next. You know, get them to think, you know, one of the goals in what I do for a living is let's get people to think 2 or 3 years down the line. Let's get out of the moment here at times to get to the growth later. So that's what I suggest to people. And then if you notice, I call it serving leadership, not servant leadership. This is the reason. I believe in action. Act. You know, I don't want people to sit there and say, I'm going to serve you someday. I want you to serve people today. I want you to serve people every day. When you're given an opportunity to serve, you serve. And you're happy to do it. And you're grateful for the opportunity to do it because that's what's different about it. You know?
Absolutely.
I'm not going to talk about reading it in a book. There are enough books that will tell me about servant leadership. I want you to take action.
So that's great. Okay, well,
Thanks.
all right. Well, we'll catch you guys next time on another It's Not About Me podcast. This is the first one. So, uh hit the subscribe button if you like this, you want to see more, and or send us a couple comments through some of the channels that Trip is, cuz what's your Twitter channel? What do you do
It's
on?
Twitter is Trip Braden.
Oh,
It's at Trip
very
Braden.
simple.
Yeah, with the second P because mom and dad couldn't decide which one we should go with, so they put two in. So,
All right, man. All right.
thank you.
Well, we'll
See
catch
you
you
next week.
later. Like I said, hit that subscribe button below and hit that bell so you can be notified of the next podcast that we're going to do. All right. Take care.
You're out.